Hello, and welcome to the first episode of Paradise Brewing, the Magic Deck Builder's favorite channel. Today's deck will be featuring an often overlooked cycle of cards, the Borderpost from the Shards of Alara block. At first glance, these don't seem like much. You trade in a basic land for a tapped artifact that taps for one of two colors. You're thinking, you might as well just run Guildgates, right? Well, maybe not. Let's take a closer look. The Borderpost may serve the same purpose as a tap land, however, they are not lands. They are artifacts with a decently high converted mana cost, and now this brings the question that all Magic players ask when they see a new card. How can I abuse the heck out of this and make my opponent suffer? Well, let me tell you how. The biggest upside to running board posts in your deck is that they serve as lands but are not lands. This means that you can run mass land removal and you won't be affected. It makes an Armageddon style effect only punish your opponent, while you get to continue deploying big threats and moving on with your game plan. Your opponent, however, is back to square one, and they likely have already played most of the lands in their hand, which means they go right to top decking, which is right where you want them. Your opponent will now be desperately scrambling to get lands back into play, so it's the perfect time to deploy some fatties and clobber them over the head. The chief fatty in this deck is Metalwork Colossus. Thanks to our border posts, his mana cost is seldom more than 2 mana. And if you ask me, a 2 mana recurable 10/10 seems like a pretty good rate. For our land destruction spells, we run 3 Tremble, as a cheap way to blow up our opponent's lands early in the game, so we can keep them behind on mana. Thoughts of Ruin is a great way to blow up a huge amount of lands. This deck runs a lot of card draw, and bouncing your basics back to your hand helps keep your hand full. Wildfire is the go-to spell for land destruction, and a board wipe. Setting your opponent behind by 4 lands will really mess with their plans, and it has the added benefit of destroying any pesky creatures they also had out. Speaking of creature removal, this deck also runs 3 Sweltering Suns, both as a way to kill off smaller creatures, and to be cycled later in the game when you need to dig for a win con. Other cards that can help you dig for a win con are One with the Machine, of which we run 2. Casting this card with a Colossus on the battlefield basically wins you the game, if the Colossus isn't already doing that. It's also not a bad rate if the biggest artifact you have is a border post. You'll still draw 3 cards, which should be enough to help you find what you were looking for. Another, more famous card draw source in this deck is Thoughtcast, which often draws you 2 cards for the low price of 1 mana. It's like a Soul Ring, but for card draw. The last card draw effect in this deck is the Antiquities War, of which we run 4. Not only will this card get you 2 much needed artifacts, but it also doubles as an alternate win con, turning all of our artifacts into big creatures to beat our opponent with. Now, I'm sure all these spells seems cool, but you're probably thinking, how would we cast them? Casting a Wildfire on turn 6 would be incredibly slow, and casting Sweltering Suns on turn 3 or 4 might not be fast enough. That's why we run 4 Everflowing Chalice and 3 Prismatic Lens. These cards help us ramp into our big spells and win the game faster. Our mana base is very simple and very inexpensive. 4 islands and 7 mountains is all that we need. And with that said, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed what you saw, consider subscribing and liking the video. It really helps smaller channels like me out. Also, feel free to leave a comment with any future video suggestions, anything you liked, didn't like, or anything you feel I could improve upon. All comments are greatly appreciated. As always, deck lists will be in the description, as will be anything else that I use during this video that you might want to find out more about.